This next third of your life can be the very best third ever. We need men who reimagine themselves, men who are willing to do the work to reinvent themselves, men who dream again. Welcome to Next Third, Best Third. Hello, and welcome to Next Third, Best Third. I'm David Fenwick, your host. This is our maiden voyage, our initial podcast, and we're so excited that you could join us. If you would do me a huge favor and click the like button and subscribe, this is going to help us bring this message to men to enter the next third of their life, living with intentionality so they can make great impact. I'm founder of Next Third, Best Third, but I'm also a man facing the next third of my life with concerns, with questions, seeking information, trying to acquire tools to ensure that I live a life with intentionality, a life of meaning, and one that impacts my spheres of influence. What is Next Third, Best Third? Well, as the name suggests, I created a platform, a gathering place, if you will, for men in particular to come together to ask questions, to explore, to build community and inspire one another, to navigate life with purpose, and to turn the tide on aging as we have typically perceived it. I've spent decades meeting with men, talking to men about deep issues, listening to their hearts, listening to their concerns, hearing their fears. I've coached them and I've walked with them through brokenness and pain. I've walked with men through divorces, through relationship issues, to financial issues. I've been there with them as they faced the death of loved ones in questions that they have. And I've found similarities and patterns in the vast majority of men, right? Irregardless of their social status, their careers, their families, and their culture. One thing that we have to understand is that men are more alike than they're not. I think sometimes comparison comes in and men think that they have it worse or nobody can understand. They'll look at somebody and they'll say, well, look at him, right? He's succeeding in this area. Or look over him, he's got it all together. His family is fantastic. His finances are fantastic. But I'm here to tell you that after spending decades with men are all facing similar issues. The vast majority. We have men who, I think we've been taught this, that we're supposed to bear this alone, that it's masculine for us to try to handle everything. But I really believe that true masculinity is when men are honest with themselves and they're vulnerable and they're recognizing, hey, I can't do this alone. I need somebody else. One thing that I've found is we do not celebrate aging well in North America. We don't celebrate it well from the youngest age of manhood until the waning ages of manhood. Right? We don't have real ways to celebrate young men, boys, 12, 13, and 14, and bringing them into manhood. A lot of countries, a lot of tribes, a lot of people groups do that very, very well. But in North America, we really don't have anything in place for that. And as you go through life, we don't celebrate men as they enter into the golden years, right? Their later years. We just don't celebrate. We don't embrace aging. Sometimes I think that we do is we pretend that aging is not inevitable, as if we just ignore it, pretend it's not happening, that it'll avoid us. Well, that's not true, right? We need as men to be entering into the coming decades with a plan, right? Knowing what we're going into, asking questions. I've heard it said that if you fail to plan, you're actually planning to fail. And that's really true in our aging. Sometimes I think we've also created this view that you just get old and die. Like it's just this one fluid thing. You just get old and you die. Like it's an inevitability that kicks in and takes over. A man will stop working, let's say he retires, and he goes home and he begins this process of getting old and dying. And that's just not true either. I believe that aging should be celebrated. I really do. Each passing year is a victory. It's even if you've had a struggle, it's still a victory. You made it, right? You've gone through it. Each year, with all the highs and lows, with all the gains and losses, offers us opportunity to acquire wisdom, to gain insight, and to equip us with tools to invest in other people, to impart wisdom to other people, to those around us and those following behind us. When we fail to celebrate aging well, we fail to celebrate the value of older men mentoring and pouring into the following generations. And that's a great loss. It's a great loss to individuals. It's a great loss to society as well. See, aging is not the enemy. It's not. Aging is a wonderful gift. But we do have a battle, and we do have an enemy. And that enemy is decay. Aging is inevitable, but decay does not have to be. In the coming episodes, we are going to explore the differences there, the differences between aging and decay. Now, we've targeted 5 main areas of decay. Now, these are areas where decay can really be paused, improved upon, and in some cases, eradicated almost altogether. And those 5 areas of decay, in no particular order, are cognitive, physical, emotional, relationships, and spiritual. Now, when I talk about spiritual, I'm really not talking about faith in itself. I'm a man of faith. Faith affects everything that I do. But when I'm talking spiritual, I'm talking about things in our life that men deal with and carry into their years, right, into these decades. Things like regret, disappointment, disillusionment, shame, guilt, unforgiveness, bitterness. Those things are strongholds, right? If you're not a person of faith, don't let the term spiritual throw you. More than cognitive and more than emotional, these things that I'm speaking of, right? These things that things like regret and shame, they erode us from within, right? They dig down deep and they attach lies to our identity. The most incredible thing that we've discovered and observed is how each of these 5 areas of decay interact with one another. They interact with one another for the destruction, or if you are intentional and you attack them and you build them up, they interact with one another for your well-being. What I mean by that is improvement in any one area actually affects the other areas. There's this aggregate benefit, if you will. So let's say you're having some issues just emotionally, right? Maybe you're depressed, let's say, struggling with depression. Well, I've found that if you invest in relationships, if you're intentional to get involved with other people, get involved in causes, just getting out and interacting with other people, you find that depression starts to lose its hold. So by building relationships, being intentional in relationships, your emotional well-being improves. And as you work on other areas of decay and you begin to see results, often you see a compounding of improvements in all areas. One of those is physical. Simple things like starting to just go for walks, just starting to implement an exercise program. You do that, next thing you know, you're feeling a little bit better about yourself, right? You start eating better because you've been exercising. You start getting rid of the brain fog, so to speak. You start to feel and think more clearly. It's a powerful thing. Now, let me be clear. I'm not qualified or an expert, but like you, I'm on this journey, right? I'm on this journey and I've scoured for information. I go to as many resources as possible. Plus, I have personal experience in this battle against decay, and I've seen the results in my own life and in the lives of so many others. And sadly, I've seen what occurs in a man when he does not take on the battle of decay, right? It really breaks my heart to see my peers, men in their 50s and 60s and even into their 70s and beyond, who are barely getting by in life. They're not inspired any longer. They're isolated. They're overweight. They're depressed. They seem like they don't have any purpose. We have to engage the enemy of decay. So let's briefly dip into just a few of these areas of decay. I'm not going to dig too deeply today at this time or try to bring resolution. I merely want us to get to the place where we begin to examine ourselves, right? I want us to get to the place where we examine where we are individually regarding decay at this juncture of our lives. You know, even if you're a man in your 30s, you should be examining yourself. You would benefit greatly by the self-examination and asking questions of yourself. I wish 30 years ago, I would have been asking these kind of questions. 30 years ago, if I would have began this journey to live with intentionality, I'd be so far ahead than where I am right now. You know, I wish I would have, in my 30s, be investing in the future David. But wherever you are, I encourage you to take time to examine your life, right? I've heard it said that a life well lived is the examined life. There's hardly anything more powerful than a man who examines himself, who is honest with himself and is vulnerable, to live with intentionality and to seek a community of men to walk with. Remember, we're not created to be alone. We're better together. And yet, all of our social construct and so much of how we were raised puts forth a picture of a man who's this individual, lone ranger, strong, I can handle it kind of thing. That is a lie. It doesn't work. But when I see men who make a decision to honestly assess where they're at, to be vulnerable, and to reach out and seek a community, a tribe, if you will, those men flourish no matter where they find themselves in the stage of life. So let's look at relationships. I believe we're created for relationships, but relationships evolve, right? The types of relationships we have and the arena from which they are developed vary and change with nearly every decade. The relationships you have with one another in your 20s is far different than the relationships that you have when you're in your mid to late 30s and you're raising toddlers. And that relationship is far different than the relationship a man has with other men in their late 40s and early 50s when they're experiencing things like empty nest. And again, those relationships are real different from a man who's in his 70s and into his 80s. So let's briefly take a look at men entering their 50s. The majority of time when a man is in his 50s, he is at or near his peak earning power. It's not as much true today as it used to be because of technology and the jobs that people have. Even in their 20s and 30s, they make incredible incomes. But for the most part, across North America, men, when they reach their 50s, have really reached the peak of their earning power. And yet, even with that, it's around this age that men approach the pinnacle of their careers. So you're at your peak earning power, but you're also at the pinnacle of your careers. There's really nowhere else to go. You're not going any higher in your careers. Now, it's true that the average age of a Fortune 500 CEO, male or female, is 56, but even that person, where do you go from being a CEO, right? You might have longevity in that career, but you really are not going any further. And remember, it's a Fortune 500. That means we're only talking 500 CEOs. So think about this as far as relationships for this man. Networking was a critical source of relationships as you built your career. You network because you're building, you're growing your spheres of influence to succeed. Once the realization slips in that you really have nowhere else to climb, right? Your career is nearing its end, networking all but stops completely. And all of a sudden, an entire sphere of influence, an entire sphere of relationships dissipates and slips away. Also, in the late 40s and 50s, you have men who are experiencing an empty nest. And men experience this far different than women. So you're reaching this age, and you might have kids who are in their late teens and they've got their own cars. Well, where you used to drive them and they used to be dependent on you, they're now going and doing things themselves, right? Oftentimes you're at a point where the kids are going to college, or maybe they're in careers and they've moved out. Many times, for a man, he has relationship with the dads who are of the friends of their own kids, right? So you have your kids' friends, and you become friends, have a relationship with those dads, and you build those things over like sports, school activities, etc. Well, men, unlike women, tend to let those relationships fade as the kids move away, because men are not really good at nurturing. Women will nurture those relationships and continue them, where men will just stop connecting for the most part. So now we have a man with a dramatically shrinking sphere of relationships. And what happens is he starts to find himself alone. Isolation creeps in. Now this brings us, and segues perfectly, to emotional decay. I think that the shrinking spheres of relationship affect men emotionally perhaps more than anything else, especially when it's combined with a loss of sense of purpose, right? Like having your career slowing down and diminishing. So much of a man's identity comes from what he does, and what he builds, and what he possesses. And so as a man enters the period where his career is no longer climbing and developing, and he stops networking, the inevitable result is that he becomes an outsider looking in, right? Even if he's got a great job and he's been successful and he's not quitting, he's staying in that career, it's not uncommon for those following behind him, those who are building and those who are climbing, they no longer interact with him. They're not networking with him any longer, right? And so you got this guy, he begins to sense that he's at the end of his career, and those people that even in his own company, the younger ones are, they're going out together after work. If they have younger kids, they end up talking and building a relationship over that. They might go to birthday parties for their kids, things like that. So they're still doing community. They're still building relationships. And here's this guy in his 50s, and he's alone even in his workplace. He's alone even in his successes. And he realized that he does not have as much in common anymore with his younger coworkers. So now you have this very dangerous concoction, right, of a man with shrinking spheres of influence, a diminishing sense of purpose, and isolation takes hold. And I'm telling you, I've observed it. Isolation is it's extremely dangerous for a man. When a man isolates, that's when he starts to medicate. That's when a man starts to numb the pain. He starts to look for other ways to like I say, just deal. Because if he's not equipped to be vulnerable, if he's not equipped and used to having other men in his life, and he's losing those men, this is a time when men can very easily, they find themselves getting out of shape, they find themselves staying inside, they find themselves drinking too much, things like that. It's very dangerous. It's very, very difficult to be alone. Even for those men who have a good relationship with a wife, right? You can have a great relationship with your wife, but a lot of times men, and I've heard this over and over, they have difficulty processing with their wives. They have difficulty processing this new horizon with their wife. It's hard for a man to come to his wife and saying, I'm feeling alone, right? Because he doesn't really, he's trying to come to terms with all this emotion that's going on in his life. And it's hard to go to your wife and say, help me, I'm hurting. Unless you have a very, very strong communication history there. I believe that is exactly why we need a tribe. We need men in our lives to inspire us, to challenge us to be open and honest and vulnerable. We need men in our lives who understand our plight. We need men in our lives who can call us out, right? Call us up and out. I'm not talking about getting in the gutter, right? I don't believe in that. I don't believe like you get in the gutter with somebody, but instead you stand above and you lend a hand and you call them out. Men need a tribe like that. Now, the next area of decay I want to touch upon very briefly is physical. There is so much science and information that has come out in the last 5 to 10 years about nutrition and exercise. I mean, I'm talking groundbreaking, earth-shattering, life-saving information. It's unbelievable where science has brought us. There's 2 books that I have been really, really influential. I'm reading all the time, like say I'm scouring podcasts and the internet, but I think there's 2 books that I want to share with you that have been extremely influential to me. The first one, it came out, I think about 20 years ago. It's called Younger Next Year. And I got it about 15 years ago. So I was 50 years old at the time when I got this book, and it just blew my mind. It challenged me that the premise of this is that, as I said, that arc that we get old and die arc, really what they found through it's written by a doctor and his patient, and it's a great book. They go back and forth on the chapters, one humorous and one informative. But their science and the research has discovered that not only can you you can stop this arc, it's not inevitable, but that as you enter into your 50s and 60s, that you can actually get old and then improve, literally becoming younger for years before that decay slowly starts. Instead of it being a cliff that you drop off, it slowly starts to go down. This book has been so fantastic. After reading that book, I ended up training and I was really in the best shape of my life. I was running all the time. I was swimming. I taught myself how to swim. I was never a good swimmer. I literally could maybe get to the side of the pool, and inevitably I built up to where I could swim a mile. My goal was to be a triathlete, except I don't like riding bikes, so I didn't do that, just being transparent. But I ended up running several half marathons and was in the best shape of my life. So that kick-started me to where I am today, still exercising 5 days a week. The next book that I'm so excited about, and this one is so rich, it's called Outlive. It's The Science of Art and Longevity. It's by Dr. Peter Attia, and he lives in Austin, Texas. He's was a doctor, a specialist in cancer, and he had an epiphany where he really felt like medicine. There's transactional medicine, right, where you try to deal with what's going on in someone's life, right? If you get a broken arm, you put it in a sling, you heal it. If there's cancer, you give some treatments to. But he started doing some research into what he calls the 4 horsemen of death. That's cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, the cancers, and neurodegenerative diseases. And what he has found in his research has been, again, it's earth-shattering. So I encourage you to get both those books. Now, a couple of quick hits before we wrap up today. Everything ties in and flows from your physical condition. Now, I know some of you don't want to hear that, but it's absolute truth. Studies have shown that your cognitive health, right, your mental cognitive health, is greatly improved by both your VO2 max, right, which is your volume of oxygen maximums, which comes from intentional cardiovascular exercising. That's getting yourself up to a certain level. And again, I'm not an expert in this, but let's say 3-4 times a week, getting yourself up to a level to where you can talk while you're exercising, but you prefer not to. So that's an extremely brisk walk. It's being on a jog, maybe bicycling, whatever it is, but you get your VO2 max. The more your VO2 max is held up, and consistent, they have found that it is tremendous for your cognitive health, actually warring against things like dementia. And then the second thing is lifting heavy weights. Believe it or not, lifting heavy weights affects your cognitive well-being as well. Dr. Peter Attia explores that comprehensively in his book. Your emotional health is directly related to your physical health as well. Again, going back to exercise and what exercise can do for you. If your physical health, if you're eating right and you're getting good sleep and you're exercising regularly, you find yourself emotionally, you're not as depressed, right? You have a better attitude, outlook at life. You're more willing to take risks and invest yourself in relationships. You're able to, you get rid of the brain fog. You start to think more clearly. You start to get creative again. All of this ties into your physical health. And nutrition is extremely key to your physical health. I've scoured information from nutritionists from all angles, from vegans to carnivores to keto, right? And all of them agree on a few things. And by the way, in the future, I've got planned some tremendous episodes with nutritionists speaking directly about this and hearing the different points of view. But there's a few things that all of these different nutritionists agree on as far as to eradicate from your diet, right? And these things, you absolutely have to eliminate these today. Number one are sodas or soft drinks and sports drinks, power drinks, things like that. Now, as far as sodas, both regular and diet are bad for you. But believe it or not, diet sodas are actually the worst thing that you can ingest. Because of the artificial sweeteners and the chemicals, they actually destroy your microbiome, which is your gut health. So eliminate sodas, first thing out of your diet. The second is ultra-processed foods. Now, these are anything that comes in boxes or bags, or they have ingredients that you've never heard of or you can't pronounce, or an entire laundry list of ingredients, right? If it has more than 3 or 4 ingredients, you're in trouble. If it has a lot of different colors listed, those are the things I'm talking about, ultra-processed foods. I tell everyone who will listen to me that if you can buy it at a gas station or a convenience store, it's not food. It's a food-like substance, and you've got to get that out of your diet. Think about the middle aisles of the grocery store. I'm not talking about the canned foods, the middle aisle of the grocery store. If you can avoid anything in the middle aisle, you're doing yourself a favor. And then third, of course, would be refined sugar. And Americans consume more refined sugar than any other nation in the world. We have an epidemic of type 2 diabetes in this country. And when you look at the studies, type 2 diabetes is a rather new phenomenon. 50 years ago and beyond, we had very little diabetes. Now the studies show that we're reaching a point where, almost 50% of all Americans have some form and some amount, are approaching struggling with type 2 diabetes. We have to not eliminate totally, but reduce greatly refined sugar. Now, a few things to add, and this is fun, because I'm one of those people, when I think about nutrition, avoiding those 3 things we just talked about is easy, but I want to know, what can I add to my daily intake? What can I add to my diet? Believe it or not, number 1 is coffee or green tea. And we're talking about good coffee, right? Good. We're talking about whole beans and things that are organic and you know where they're coming from, not the big cans of Folgers. I'm talking about good coffee and green tea. It's extremely healthy for you. I've got a good friend of mine, he never drank coffee before, and he has now started because of this information. He's adding it to his daily diet. Number 2 is vinegars. Vinegars are extremely good for us. They're good for our guts. They're just good for overall. What I do now, every day I take apple cider vinegar and I put it in water and I take that. So I start my mornings with a glass of water, and my second glass of water has apple cider vinegar in it. Fantastic. And the third is actually a few things, but it's things like avocados are great for you, pears, pomegranates, olive oil. What I've started doing is I've started to take olive oil, and we're talking about organic, cold press. The best is from Morocco. It's the highest in polyphenols. And I take that and I take a shot of that every day. I actually drink that olive oil every day. Extremely good for you. So you can add those kind of things. And as I said, we're going to be diving really deep into nutrition and exercise in coming podcasts. I have some amazing guests lined up. I'm so excited. And I invite you to visit our website, nextthirdbestthird.com. The link is below. And please, when you go there, just request my free audiobook. My first audiobook, it's an easy listen. It's about 40 minutes. It's called Next Third, Best Third, Living Life with Intentionality. In the coming weeks, hopefully I'll be releasing my second book on legacy. I encourage you, go there, sign up, and become, just join our tribe. So with that, I just want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you next time.